Good morning, and welcome to Redeemer Lutheran Church. I'm Pastor Gary Lodeholt. As I continue this week of sharing pastoral articles I wrote for the Redeemer Monthly newsletter, we come now to 2006. I have a vague inkling that I may have shared today's story and tomorrow's story with you in these morning live streams before, but they are among my favorites. So here we go again. It was the Easter story played out in my backyard. Now, before you decide I'm a nut, it's often said that the relationship between your dog and you mirrors the relationship between you and God. Dogs sometimes look at us in wonder as we do things they can't understand and provide them with their needs. Sort of like we look at God. So it was that one early morning before school, one of our dogs had a problem. Our dogs are in the backyard, and one of them, a black lab puppy named Spot, had been chewing on a thin circular bone and had somehow gotten it behind his bottom front canines and around his lower jaw. He couldn't get it off, and it was cutting into his gum. Jeremy and Nan discovered it. Poor Spot was sitting near the porch, just staring at the door, waiting for us, helpless. They tried to help, but every time they moved the bone, it cut into him more, and he turned his head. The bone was firmly wedged behind those teeth, and Spot was in a mess. When I came on the scene, I tried the same thing. Spot stood there patiently while I looked at it, but I couldn't get it off either. I knew that if we could somehow break the bone, we could get it off, but how was I to do that without hurting Spot? Then I noticed a thin area on the side and remembered my tin snips. I got them, and as Michael held the dog, I tried to cut through the old, dry bone, and sure enough, I did. After a second snip, I grabbed above and below the cut and broke it open and threw the pieces away from me into the yard. Spot literally leaped for joy and jumped off the step he was on and ran out into the yard, and I picked up one of the pieces of bone and ran around happily. I looked up at Nan on the porch and I said, "Do you know how many sermons just happened here?" She looked at me and said, "What?" And I said, "We are in bondage to bone and cannot free ourselves." And indeed, that was Spot's predicament. And it's a lot like our bondage to sin. There was nothing Spot could do to free himself. It took someone with abilities beyond his, abilities he didn't understand, to set him free. Just like we need God. Just like God frees us from our bondage to sin and death in Jesus and his Easter victory. We sit helpless at the door, needing God, just like Spot needed us. She looked at me, not knowing what to say. So I went on to explain Spot's leap of joy and how that might well compare to our own joy at the forgiveness of our sins. How at the communion table I see that joy in the faces of so many as they receive the marvelous gift from God. Still, Nan stared at me, so I pointed out that I threw those pieces of bone away with great force, getting them far away from Spot. Probably a lot like God throws our sin far from us to keep us safe in faith. I could tell she was ready to take the boys to school, but I still had one more. "Did you notice," I said, "how Spot went right over and picked up the bone again? Doesn't that remind you of what we so often do once we're freed from our sin? So often we go right back and pick it up again. And then we need God once more. It's Easter. Easter is about just that kind of forgiveness. Nan stared at me. I just smiled at her, and then she left with the boys, muttering something about how she could have married a normal man. But I was happy because I knew Spot understood grace. Because of Jesus, because of Easter, so do we. Thanks for watching, and remember to let this day belong to God.